Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for December 7, 2015. We'll begin with a special order calendar, decision items. Item number 1, 69946BZ, 22401 North Conduit Avenue, Queens.
Okay, I didn't have any more issues with this. They're just going to be conditions for the grant.
Fine.
Continued hearing items. Item number 2, 33378BZ, 136-138 West 24th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, they provided supporting studies for the economic conditions around 1978 to show that there was a market slump and that TDRs were not actively traded at that time. They also provided proof that none of the potential receiving sites were in common ownership, so I think they responded to all of our questions.
Item number 3, 82686BZ through 82886BZ, Grand Central Parkway, Queens.
Okay. So they submitted a report about the radio frequency levels conducted in the buildings, conducted on October 15th and 16th. I have an enormous amount of concerns. The first is that I'm concerned about the testing method that only tests to a height of 6'6" above the roof. This roof, like all others, have building equipment and bulkheads that exceed 6'6" in height. Workers climb ladders. I know that one of the bulkheads, at least, the bulkheads are measured, but they climb ladders for adjusting other kinds of equipment, so they are considerably taller than 6'6". But anyway, as suspected, the radio frequency levels on the rooftops have increased since last measured in 2009, with significant increases in exposure at building number 1. In 2009, the BSA instructed the applicant to use general population maximum permissible exposure limits, which are now exceeded at several locations. Even more concerning is the level of exposure on the elevator penthouse roof, which was never cordoned off with danger fencing, in the way location point number 133 is, and which greatly exceeds the allowable MPE, even occupational levels. The lack of concern for workers who may be on the roof for hours at a time is frankly shocking to me. How possibly are the 6 minutes of exposure at a time for the penthouse repair work regulated? It's like being a Navy SEAL diver where you can only go down to a certain number of atmospheres for 3 minutes at a time, and then you have to come back up. Those are, would they be regulated by the building superintendent? Putting signs up does not protect workers who often don't read English and often have to do as they are told by employers who don't follow standard safety measures, as we know. Recently, there was a big article about the number of severe accidents and deaths on construction sites in New York this past year. This is common knowledge in the building industry. The only solution here is to cordon off areas and make them absolutely inaccessible except by key control by the telecommunications company. That doesn't seem like a viable option. The paper sign on the door is hardly adequate to guide a worker to avoid working in an area. And with respect to the so-called incidental workers who would be on the roof to make general repairs, how are they made aware of their ability to, what it says in the statute, exercise control over their exposure? What type of control can they exercise? That they not take the job, not repair the leaking roof? The points about the general population MPEs nearly cover an entire, the points above the general population MPEs nearly cover an entire wing of building number 1. And if so, what is the impact on the residents below? And what about working inside of the elevator penthouse, inside of it? Because, as stated in 2009, building residents may access the roof in fire emergencies. The stairs lead to the roof for rescue. Limits on the roof may not exceed general population MPEs, so equipment simply has to be removed. With respect to hot spots like the elevator bulkhead, it must be cordoned off with inaccessible barriers under key, and no workers permitted on it while the antenna are in operation. Now, that's only if you can confine the hot spot to the bulkhead, and I don't really believe that's possible. You need to provide a revised diagram showing accessible and inaccessible points applying general population MPEs. On building number 2 and 3, there were some spots that tested higher than 20% for general population. Why were they depicted as green dots? And the applicant should bring the testing engineer to the hearing. And I also would like to know whether building management is aware of these results. Use of the rooftop for these purposes is under lease and should be managed by ownership. The owner's rep should come to the hearing, and when I say owner's rep, I don't mean building management, I mean a representative from the co-op board. So I'm curious to hear everybody else's comments, but I was frankly shocked by what I read.
Well, I had questions about the exceedance and how they say that they're actually containing and controlling it. They mention at point 133 that it's contained and controlled using current protocols. I didn't understand exactly what those protocols were and whether they were in conformance with any federal guidelines. It wasn't clear to me that other areas that they say have now exceeded levels that I guess are acceptable, whether or not those are controlled and contained. They didn't really go into that. So I just had questions about that.
I think they said if you put up a sign, you've followed the regulations.
Well, are we precluded from regulating their radio frequency emission issues by the federal statute?
Not, they were instructed in the last hearing to follow general population levels and not occupational levels, and so this far exceeds general population.
Right, but I'm talking about in terms of removal of, because I think you said removing some of the antenna, and I was wondering if we were precluded from considering removal because of the federal jurisdiction over the emissions, and if we are, then I would agree with you that at least it should be cordoned off so that nobody could wander into the area, not just the small hotspot, perhaps like a cord around, like some sort of fencing around the entire area of building 1, because it is a very large area.
Right. I think that the way I read the federal regulations is that a municipal body can't determine whether the installation is acceptable based on environmental factors, but if it exceeds federal regulations, which this does, then we do have the authority to say no. And I frankly, in reading the engineer's report, reading between the lines, you could see sort of how he was dancing away from actually making a statement that this is dangerous, right?
Well, the building has to have an emergency evacuation plan, which I believe has to be approved by the fire department. And it's my understanding that evacuation to the roof is part of the evacuation plan for building number 1. And from the residents are not trained in radio frequency emissions or the dangers or how to avoid them. So in my opinion, stairway C might be unusable by the residents under the current conditions. That if they used stairway C to get to the roof, the whole area around stairway C exceeds the general population limits. So I think that their installation at the roof is in conflict with the approved emergency evacuation plan, and I would like them to comment on how they propose to mesh those two items. I also feel that compliance with the FCC guidelines should be required if the rooftop is part of the emergency evacuation plan. I also feel that the stairway egress doors going to the roof have these messages which are very confusing. If you're in a fire and you're going up to the roof, you read a sign on the door, it says, "No trespassing, subject to arrest." Or you can read, "RF levels exceed FCC safety limits for exposure." You know, what are you supposed to do at that point?
Don't go there.
Don't go there. Well, you
Sorry.
can't go down the stairway because could be a smoke condition or a fire.
Right.
So I really feel that there's a serious conflict. And maybe they should actually bring the person who did their emergency evacuation procedure or plan to describe, you know, what they feel is a reasonable solution. In this case, since it went up so much since the last time, I don't even feel that roping it off is feasible. And they should probably tell us what changes they had done, which made the situation so dramatically increase.
Everybody's picked up on that.
You know, frankly, I think that the building management would be horrified to hear this information about what's going on with a tenant. It's a tenant. They are leasing space to rent, you know, an antenna. They're not subject to any FCC regulations. They could say, no, get this off my building. And if they realized how whatever it is, not radioactive, electromagnetic field, I never really understand the difference between the radioactivity and electromagnetic, but it's hugely dangerous. The idea that a person can only be exposed to the roof of the bulkhead for 6 minutes at a time, and I don't know what the interval in between. You wear one of those little
Badges.
radiation badges, right?
It's turning red.
Crazy, on top of a residential building, really outrageous. Okay, next.
New cases, item number 4, 14-10BZ and 70-15BZ, 38-50 Cooper Square, Manhattan.
Okay, just wanted a couple of other responses. I just wanted to understand the impact of the rear yard incursion on lights and rear yard incursion, lights and noise on the neighbors to the rear, but otherwise I thought this was a really complete and clear application. And it's also quite modest.
I just had a question about the roof structure, and it is a bit higher than what they actually need in terms of 25 feet plus or minus for the interior height for basketball and volleyball. And I'm just wondering if that additional height is absolutely necessary. It's nice with the curvilinear aspect of the roof, but that curve exceeds the height. So maybe they can just discuss why that would be necessary.
I have a question about the previously approved plans, and their statement talked about how originally the gym was going to be on the 3rd and 4th floor where the multi-purpose rooms were originally approved, and then they said that it wasn't going to be sufficient, and so they decided they were going to put it on the 4th floor. But their previously approved plans show about 28 feet 6 inches of floor-to-ceiling height between those two floors. So I wanted to know what changed between then and now, because it seems like that probably would be somewhat sufficient. And also, what is going on the 3rd floor in its place, and why is it essential to the programmatic needs of the program? Because I noticed they put some new things on that 3rd floor. I believe now there's also a theater there that wasn't on the previously approved plans. So it seems like their curriculum has changed, so I think they should just speak to that.
They did mention that they need many more small classrooms because they teach in seminar style, and they didn't anticipate that, and that they used to rely more on NYU for classes for 11th graders.
Right, and then
Yeah.
that had to go on site, but the theater seems like it's something new, and they could just, and they also had like storage room area that is now also becoming classrooms.
Right.
So,
Okay.
I think the arguments that are quite succinctly laid out, I would like a little bit of clarification on the approved plan where as Commissioner Otley Brown mentioned, the two general-purpose rooms that were in the rear that was located on the third and the fourth floor could have been used if the in-between floor was removed, could have been used as a basketball court, had the programmatic elements not changed, which required more classrooms. And also, even without the classrooms, was that height adequate for a basketball court? I think that clarification would kind of further help the argument here. I think the points that have been laid out is very clear, and I definitely appreciated the graphics that were put in with the alterations that showed where all the basketball court could be laid and how it would affect the circulation. I think that was very helpful. My only comment is the existing condition plan that is submitted, Plan 08. I think it shows the existing office that is there on the fourth floor. If it is so, it would be helpful if the note just says that it's a News Group 6 office space that's currently there. From the drawings, it was not very clear, so that notation would just make
Oh, so you thought it was offices for the school? Yeah, you have to read the statement of facts to see it's...
Yeah, I think just that notation will be helpful. I think otherwise, I feel comfortable.
Okay. So just to clarify though, different from what Commissioner Otley Brown said, because she was talking about the height was 28'6" in those third and fourth floor multipurpose rooms, so you would have gotten that height, right?
And the question is that adequate for a basketball court?
Okay.
Let's say if the programmatic element was not an issue. My feeling is it probably was not. They would have still required the need to raise the roof to accommodate a basketball court, I think.
Okay.
And the fact that there's been a programmatic change that eliminated the third floor general purpose room further warrants the need for.
Okay.
Appeals calendar, continuing hearing items. Item number 5, 3515A, 2001 Bartow Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay. Super interesting. Sorry, scrolling. Okay. So, DOB now makes the argument, if I read it correctly, that the building code allows individual sign panels to be licensed as signs as defined in the building code, but that a collection of those building code signs can make up a single zoning resolution sign if read together with a single message. I'm curious why then the arguments that were made, if that's the case, I'm curious why the arguments that were made before the ECB for the multiple sign permits, that those cases that were given to us, and the notice of violations were zoning resolution based and not building code based. If that's so clearly the position, then why wasn't that what was argued before the ALJ and then in the appeals? Department of Buildings insists that the 12-inch separation between the sign panels doesn't undermine the continuous perimeter requirement of the zoning resolutions, since they're not discernible from the arterial, where it is for a continuous advertising campaign, where it's for a continuous advertising campaign of one image spread across the many panels. So it sounds like what they're looking to is what's reasonable somehow under the Highway Beautification Act. We understand the sort of legislative purpose of this regulation, but then we have the text. But in its analysis of the signs that's cited by the appellant, the cases of the signs that the appellant referred to, the Department of Buildings states that certain distances between signs are easily discernible. In particular, at 616 West 46th Street, two signs with the same product being sold comply with the distance from the arterial regs because they are two separate signs, but wouldn't if they were one sign. The distance between the two signs, which the DOB describes as several feet, looks actually in the photograph to be about 2 feet. If you look at the size of windows, which look like bathroom windows, and they're either 18 or 24 inches, that's just how they come. So then it sounds like DOB's minimum separation standard is 2 feet, whereas 1 foot isn't a minimum separation. So then I'm a little lost. How do we decide 2 feet? 1 foot, it's, seems arbitrary. DOB's current submission now focuses on the unified use of the 27 panels, citing to ECB decisions where unified installations were in contest. Am I now understanding that if each panel display in the sign that's the subject of this appeal, am I now understanding that if each panel displayed a separate image, they would be okay with it? DOB states that the applicant has the option to obtain one permit or several for multiple surfaces with a common image, but I'd like them to cite examples where that has occurred, because the appellant's expert states that that's not allowed by the department. The appellants added more examples to distinguish from the Times Square signage that has no limitation on area. They use 610 Broadway, which has 3 560 square foot Coors Light signs in an M15B, which are separately permitted and were audited, and which would exceed the maximum allowable if combined. The images don't stand alone, so the Department of Buildings really needs to respond to that. They also make reference to an OPPN of 1099 that directs examiners how to review signs for permits. And there's no mention of how you measure the surface area or the separation. I'd like to know whether the DOB can tell us whether that OPPN is still in force, and whether there's another one perhaps that gives more information about how to measure the signs that predated this application. So far, I'm still waiting for a really persuasive answer from DOB, or a persuasive argument from DOB about why the separation isn't dispositive about creating a sign. Next.
I would agree. I was a bit confused by DOB's reasoning. It sort of reminded me of how you would file something for code reasons, but you are looking at it differently for zoning, purposes. And if that's the case, and okay, fine, if you're going to be able to file individual segments, even if you're talking about, one image, but you have individualized segments, but I think the zoning analysis has to be uniform and the same. So if you're saying to me just for code purposes I can file something in a particular way, I don't think that changes your zoning analysis. So I think that they have to kind of wrap themselves around that a little bit more and explain why there would be different outcomes. Because I think you're right. I think that if you don't have a unified image, there's a different outcome. And why would there be if it's the same structure? So I think we have to get that sort of straight. And it doesn't explain, there are, as I said in the last hearing, there are several examples of something rather this large out there that have been filed separately, and I think that they've always looked at it as these separate individual panels right next to a highway, and so I'm not seeing where their zoning analysis is consistent. So I have a real problem with that.
I found the appellant's argument still to be more persuasive, that there needs to be attention paid to the definition in 1210 to a sign, and that has to just be defined for signs regardless of the type of sign it is, and then after that move on to determine whether or not it's an accessory or an advertising sign. And it doesn't seem like Department of Buildings is doing that. They're not creating a single definition of how we consider this sign, and then after that fact, making a determination as to whether it's accessory or business. It seems like Department of Buildings might be merging both definitions and using that as some kind of interpretation, as to how we're going to look at signs. And because of that, it's just confusing the situation, and it seems as if, depending on where a sign is located, and, you know, they're coming up with justifications as to why they're considering it one sign or several signs. And so to me, the result is that it's pretty arbitrary.
So it's like result-driven.
Yeah.
Well, I thought the Department of Buildings papers were very reasonable. And I could see that, you know, every piece of a sign is a structure, and each of those structures needs a permit. And they can be at different orientations, not all on the same flat plane. One can be something directly mounted to a building, one is something above a building. So each of those structures needs a permit. And when you go to look at the zoning, the potential for a sign to have a coordinated single message that you measure to the extreme limits of writing or representation. So to me, if these panels all will combine to be one message, then you go to the extreme limits of that message. You know, the vinyl signs on some of the examples are static images, which are not going to change rapidly, and every time they go to DOB, they change them. I think they need DOB to approve them. But with these digital LED signs, the message is constantly changing, and they're not going to go to DOB to say, oh, well, we have 17 little signs or we have one big sign. So it has to be something that works. And the potential, and they've admitted that they can do one continuous large sign. I think that, you know, precludes the fact that they have to measure to the extreme limits of representation.
But a lot of sign permits say changeable copy. Advertising sign permits are mostly for changeable copy. You don't have to go to DOB and say, I'm now going to put up a Coors Light run where top of the can is here and bottom of the can is here. So you actually, unless it's not a changeable copy sign, you can go ahead and
You mean with the vinyl signs?
with the vinyl signs, with the billboard signs. I think all of the signs that are advertising signs,
Okay.
unless badly filed by the applicant, say changeable copy. So the technology actually isn't affecting.
Well, I do feel the technology is important in terms of, you know, what the DOB said about these LED 12-inch boundaries. When you have this lighted LED sign, and when you're driving along on the highway, those 12-inch borders are not really discernible because the light blurs. So I just found their rationale
But when you
convincing.
But when you get closer, it's discernible. Like, where is discernible?
Well, the regulations were put in place for arterial highways. So I would say viewing from an arterial highway is what the DOB is concerned about, what the zoning resolution is concerned about.
But then isn't discernible, how do we decide what's discernible? That's like when you look at the within view of, or the 360
Right.
rule, right? Because maybe it's a 90 rule.
Well, maybe it's
a
something that
180
can
rule.
be, you know, an LED light at a certain illumination with a certain power emits, you know, a certain amount of aura or halo. And what is that, and how does that relate to the separation?
So
But
you're
I
talking
still
about-
feel you go to the extreme limits of the representation to measure the surface area of a sign. You know, if you really want to get down to it, for some of these digital signs, one little pixel or one little unit has a perimeter. So are you going to measure each little light bulb? Each light bulb has a little perimeter.
But you don't see that at
Well,
all, because it's
okay.
hidden by the,
Fine,
By the
but it does
technology.
have a perimeter.
but you can't, that's not discernible ever, unless maybe you're behind the sign.
If you're close enough, you could discern it. If you could discern one little light spot.
There's a
One
there-
bulb is off.
when the bulb is off, right?
So I'm kind of on the, I mean, I see both sides of this. I did read I found the DOB argument reasonable and kind of in the sense like the way they were presenting, I thought there was some rationale in the way they were justifying the panels, like each panel was an individual, was defined as a surface area, like within each facade, each panel was treated separately, and in these cases, the zoning district didn't have a total sign surface area requirement, so that's why the issue of these large panel signs, even though there were 4 of them, exceeded a certain sign, total size didn't matter in this case. However, what I thought was interesting, for example, the express sign that was there, it is 3 big panels. And the third panel, there is separation between all 3 of them. The third one is significant. You can, like, it shows this person standing, and there's a huge gap. But you can still, as a pictorial representation, even with that separation, one could still see, can make that entire representation with that significant gap of that one image. So to some extent, the pictorial representation and with those gaps, however far or near it is, I think that goes back to the question of the distance from the arterial and how the gaps would be read. Would it be read as a 1-foot gap if I was standing right there, or it would look like a line that, as a passerby, it would not matter. Just a very quick sample would be, like, if you have taken the PATH train, when the train is in motion, you'll see these advertisement signs. But if the train stops by mistake, those signs by themselves will not make any sense, because the gap between those signs, but each is so much that the whole purpose of this advertisement sign was meant for you to see it while it was in motion.
Yeah.
So if I'm an arterial highway and I'm going by, that 1-foot separation pictorially visually may not make that much of an impact when I'm going by. So I do see there's a merit to looking at it, the entirety of as it could be in each panel could be its own advertisement, and it could also be one entire panel for one advertisement sign. So I do think we need, the review of it has to be looked at both as individual panel and as one large panel.
So then what do you do if it's not a coordinated sign?
You get a
In
different
the pictorial representation, which was one of the things they said that they might do, right?
So the Coors sign was an interesting, I would like DOB to kind of explain how the Coors light sign was treated as 3 separate panels, because unless they're looking at the 3 elements separately, because the top portion does show the symbol of the Coors light, which is the Rocky Mountain, I think it's Rocky Mountains, one of those mountain symbols that we associate with Coors light. And then there is the slight writing on the thing which says Coors, and then the main bottle. And then the bottom, there is something that also has a reference to Coors. So is that why those 3 are seen as 3 separate signs? Because each one has this term Coors written in some form or the other? I think,
Well, that's what
I don't know.
DOB says that on the one hand. It says each sign stands alone, therefore it's a separate sign. They're separate signs for zoning and for code. But then there are sometimes these coordinated efforts where it's a piece of a chair that just happens to be part of a larger image where there's a guy in a suit sitting on a chair, right? So, but that's also somehow allowed to be separate signs because the gap is larger. So that's the thing. It seems like, how do you decide what the gap
It
is?
becomes so subjective,
Right.
right? It's sort of like the reviewer's subjective look at what he's seeing or she's seeing, and it shouldn't be subjective. It's got to be something that anyone who is reviewing it would come up with, 99.9% of the time is going to come up with the same answer. Otherwise, it becomes you start to sort of forum shop, like, oh yeah, so-and-so, go to him because he sees, these segmented signs in this particular way and he's going to pass that through. So, it's got to be a standard in which that everybody sort of sees the same thing in the same way.
I agree. Only thing, the fact that this is by an arterial highway, and I think that element is a critical factor in determining how this sign is going to be read.
But that's still subjective, because I think that it depends on the driver, it depends on the eyesight of the driver, it depends on the speed of the car, it depends on, whether you have a driver who's looking dead ahead, a driver who's glancing to the side, and I think that you can't implement any kind of rule or statute based on subjectivity. There's just no way that you're going to be able to ensure that the standard is adhered to across the board in all 5 boroughs. And I think that it just would be not stand up to any legal challenges.
And the surface area doesn't apply to the arterial signs alone. It's a definition of surface area for all signs.
For all signs.
So there isn't like a little asterisk that says, but for arterial signs, something. I don't know what the something would be, but for arterial signs, X. So that's our other problem, right? So we're not just looking at it for this arterial situation where there's speed, you're also looking at it where you're walking down the street and you see Broadway signs, right? Where there's not very big gaps. And we clearly read the sign together. So, yeah, so obviously, we need more persuading.
The discussion goes on.
And more discussion, yeah. Thank you. Next.
New cases, item number 6, 8315A through 8615A, 34th Street, 35th Street, 36th Street. This is in Mr. City.
Okay, with respect to 36th Street, we seem to have a threshold issue where DOT states that it denies the application. Maybe the word denies is not correct, but nevertheless, DOT opposes the application because it says there's a 1996 Corporation Council opinion of dedication. What I'm concerned about is that DOT may not have understood the nature of the application, which does not propose to close public access to the privately owned map street by putting like a house in the middle of it, but instead it's kind of a modification on existing street furniture like loading docks and stuff like that. So we are going to, on our side, reach out to DOT again to clarify. I'm told we do have letters for 34th and 35th Street from them. I didn't find that in the, I guess it was further on and I got stuck on that section. We also need fire department's input on this. Did you get that?
I emailed it to you this morning.
Oh, you did? Okay, I'm sorry.
It's in SharePoint.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that they're okay with the proposal because some of the street widths are reduced when it's opposing loading docks, but actually their proposal where they change the position of the truck docks so they're no longer on the diagonal, it's actually opening up the street to make it safer. So it seems to me the fire department would prefer that. I didn't see a community board recommendation.
I emailed you their comments. I had emailed you last week the comments. They had met in June, I think it was, June, and they were okay.
Do we get
There's a couple of questions. We don't have an actual resolution. They couldn't find it. They said they emailed it to us, but we have no record of receiving it. So they said that they would try and get it to us today.
Okay.
The guy was on vacation, so.
Okay.
But I had emailed you her comment.
Okay, I didn't see it, okay. The street and site plans in the electronic versions are very light, so lines are dropping out, and so sometimes we don't even see what's going on the other side of the street. I believe it's because these drawings were scanned. They shouldn't be scanned, they should be PDFs direct from the drawings, because we can't also read the text. When we try to zoom in to read the text, we can't see
We
it.
didn't do a PowerPoint presentation and walk you.
Okay, no, but I mean, even for the submission, for the final drawings, they're not legible. So we're going to need legible drawings. Yeah. We also seem to be missing the full streetscape version for 35th Street. I didn't find that in the file. It was all of 36th and all of 34th and 35th, only the end.
Right, because I think that's the only part of that block that they're actually building. on is
Yeah.
that one loading dock on the end.
That's true also for
rest is
34th
as of right,
Street.
right?
Yeah, but what they do is they show the full streetscape and how it's going to be handled. And I even think from fire department perspective, they want to know that the trucks can go all the way through.
I think in response, they submitted that proposed plan to 35th Street in response to their comments.
I
Take a look.
I didn't find it. And then I don't know how other people feel about whether they want to see a maneuverability plan. It's just, I was curious about how those gigantic semis actually parallel park like that.
Well, I think they pull in. That's why there's such a long
then
area.
back up.
They pull in and then just back
Back
up.
up.
They don't have to parallel park, really.
Yeah, because there shouldn't be anybody else there.
Right.
Eek, right. Any other comments?
Go ahead.
Oh, I just was going to say, it looked to me like it was definitely an improvement for both pedestrians and vehicles. So thought it was a good project.
I had a question about the freight entrances and whether the materials being unloaded and put onto big lifts or something were using the same walkways as the pedestrians. And if where you parked is exactly where you go into the building, or if you have to go down the street to get into the building where you have to make your delivery. And there seems to be, in some of the photos, a lot of cars currently parked on the street. So I wanted to know where they're going to be relocated to. And the courtyards in between the buildings, some of them had little trucks in them. But those are like, the buildings make a U, fronting on 3rd Street. What are they going to be using the courtyards for?
My question was related to the fact that based on the existing loading docks, it seems there are more existing loading docks than the proposed condition would provide. I just wanted to understand what is the volume of loading, and will that be adequately be met with the reduction in the loading docks that are being proposed? I think overall it definitely provides a better pedestrian vehicular and separation of the pedestrian vehicular circulation, and just kind of, will the loading dock be adequate? The reduced number of loading docks that are being proposed along each street frontages, will that be adequate for the current operation?
Great, thank you.
Move on? Item number 7, 181 through 18615A. This is Carriage Court in Staten Island.
Okay, we have fire department sign off and the city planning authorization for the national area. The statement of facts confusingly states there will be no parking along Carriage Court. Although the fire department's October 1st letter of 2015 does not mention that, and the plans and the fire department's 2013 approval letter indicates that only parallel parking is permitted along the private road. I say this all because I wish you would coordinate your materials and that the statement of facts would match other materials, because it makes it quite confusing. Assuming the drawings actually now say only parallel parking is permitted. That's obviously important to the fire department, and as of the last hearing, fire department asked us to have a restrictive covenant that becomes part of the homeowners association's restrictions that includes parking restriction that way, so that everyone is aware, and that therefore the homeowners association can issue tickets, because since it's a private street, the city has no authority to issue tickets. Also, I would like, so that means that the counsel for the applicant will prepare a restrictive covenant, which I'd like the fire department's counsel to look at also to make sure it's covering whatever it is they want it to cover. That will become kind of like a standard covenant we'll use when we have to restrict parking on these private streets. And also approval in this case would be conditioned on the sprinklering in all houses and interconnected smoke alarms. Anybody else?
Zoning calendar, decision items, item number 8, 2415BZ, 7117 Roosevelt Avenue, Queens.
I believe we have to reopen this to receive a corrected document.
Continued hearing items, item number 9, 30-12BZ, 14241 Roosevelt Avenue, Queens.
We received a letter dated September 20th, 2015, and a petition with 9 pages of signatures from residents of the building adjoining the proposed rooftop parking. They expressed concerns about noise and fumes, security, and traffic. They have a lot of recommendations about traffic controls and absorptive sound wall materials and so on. The applicant, probably in response to that, in response to our request, actually, provided a copy of the memorandum of understanding between the Barbizon Board of Directors and the applicant, where the applicant agreed to do many of the things that are listed by the residents in their petition. Obviously, to my point of view, there has not been adequate community outreach with the residents by either the applicant or the Barbizon's board. The BSA's request that the residents be notified of this hearing obviously stimulated these recent responses. And so I would say if we have residents in attendance at the hearing tomorrow, which I suspect because there were between 9 and 13 pages, depending on which PDF you look at, of signatures, I'd like the applicant to go through using boards to show what measures they're taking so that the residents, or at least their representatives, can see what's being done here. At the last hearing, we were not provided with revised drawings, so we couldn't comment on the actual proposals. We just talked about them generally. We were told that there would be an 8-foot glass partition with high hedges planted around the perimeter of the roof for sound buffering, and that the aesthetics of the CMU concrete block wall would be addressed. The current drawings, which I understand are by a new architect, show an 8-foot high concrete block wall with a 4-foot high glass wall above it. According to the plans, the only planting area is 20 feet away from the property line on the garage side of the ramps, and it is not continuous, leaving no planting buffering at all between the 6-story residential building that is 20 feet away and the ramp. The blank wall of the 12-story building that is 34 feet away is partially buffered with perimeter planting. So I don't understand that approach. So my problem is that the neighbors who have now written this letter and signed this petition will now look onto a concrete block wall with a 4-foot opaque glass partition above it to shield from car lights, and will not have the benefit of perimeter planting to improve the aesthetics of this project or to further dampen noise. I also don't know what happened to the 8-foot high glass partition. It's clearly 4 feet high. I'm not really sure because the last time they had done an analysis showing the angle of the lights when the cars go up the ramp. So I don't know whether the 4-foot partition as proposed now is too short or whether they raised the height of that. I don't think they raised the height of the wall. It's exactly the same drawing that was provided way back when, years ago. So I think what happened is they hired a new architect. The architect drew up what there had been before on his own title block, et cetera, and didn't make any changes. The ramps, the solution that I see in looking at the existing conditions, ramps have not been built yet. The ramps need to be pulled away from the property line to allow room for planting bed, and an aesthetically appropriate finish treatment of the concrete block wall must be provided and maintained. Also, they didn't provide a lighting plan to show the lumens and the spread. That was a big concern. We discussed at the prior hearing using lights that are mounted low instead of floodlights. That's done in a lot of parking garages in other countries. I don't know about here, but we don't need it to look like a football stadium. They also need to provide a landscaping plan that specifies the number and type of vegetation. Anybody else?
I had a question about, the applicant says they're going to provide periodic security checks, and I didn't, that was kind of very open-ended. I wanted to know, like, how often? Is it like every hour? And also, they should have a maintenance schedule to clean up debris, garbage, things like that. Make it clear that there's not going to be any vehicles on the roof overnight, and if there's any there, they will be towed away, so maybe they can add tow-away signs. And their elevations don't show the planting beds with the trees, which I think they should add.
They don't show the planting with the trees?
Not in the elevations. No.
Right, you're right.
I think they would look better if they had the trees. But in terms of the photos that the opposition submitted, you're looking down on a rooftop with a lot of HVAC equipment with a patchy roof. I think this will really be an improvement.
As long as it's not a raw concrete block wall, which won't be.
Right, but I think they did mean initially the 8-foot CMU. It's a sound-absorbing wall, because there were concerns about the noise. So this is a wall that's not hollow, it's treated to provide sound attenuation.
Oh, but they didn't say anything. Where did they say?
I read that somewhere. I think they gave details on the concrete block.
Really? Okay, so if they could coordinate that, because it's not on the drawings, it doesn't say, it says CMU sound absorbing wall, but concrete block wall is sound absorbing, if you want to say it like that, right? They need to specify on the drawings. But concrete block, don't know what the material looks like, but unless it's a finished block,
It just would look like concrete block,
it'll be a
right?
concrete block, horrible, back of the, not provided. Okay.
Item number 11, 316 14BZ, 115 Haywood Street, Brooklyn.
As we requested, they provided a very clear summary of the history of the zoning lot and the commercial parking in the R district, so that clarified that issue. They corrected the parking study by conducting an on-site parking requirement count. I'm trying to understand the current number of employees and customers versus what is proposed. This is actually something we discussed at the last hearing. As I understand it, the second and third floors are built out fully, but the first floor is not. And also, I couldn't understand whether staffing has reached the expected levels. So I'm not sure really what that parking study showed.
I thought they said that all the office workers that will be there are there.
Really?
That's what I thought.
But the
Doesn't really make
retail,
Yeah.
I don't
But the retail
understand,
is
the
not.
retail is not there, and it just seems to me that there's going to be a lot of parking required because of the retail staff.
Right.
And it seems like there's only 3 parking spaces
Right.
in demand in this current parking study. It doesn't make much sense to me.
Right. Okay, and then in terms of the drawings, the text is illegible in some places. It's a computer glitch where the text overwrites. So for the final set of drawings, that needs to be corrected. We need also the spec sheets on the fencing and treatment, they provided the spec sheets on the fencing and the treatment of the masonry wall, and I think the plans were much improved. I'd like the spec sheet information to appear on the drawings so we don't end up not getting what those were. So for instance, it would say montage plus welded ornamental steel fencing or equal, or it would say decorative concrete coating with brick pattern stamping by deco wall or equal. And then I would like to condition, when making the motion, would condition approval on the planting to be maintained at all times to conceal the parking area, including the cars parked on the upper stacker level.
It'd be high enough.
Yeah, it has to be higher, yeah.
Could they clarify, the architect's letter says that there'll be 17 attended parking spaces, but the plans, P101, say all spaces will be attended. So they need to clarify which one is true, and also, they need to show how many queuing spaces are in the upper lot and the lower lot, if there is attended in both lots, which I assume
So
there should be.
to mark which are the queuing spaces on the drawing?
Yeah, they should delineate queuing spaces. He just makes reference that there will be queuing spaces.
Anybody else with that? Yeah, I don't know how they would have
You have
not attended,
stackers.
they have
Yeah, so you
stackers.
have to have all of it
have to,
attended, so I don't understand that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't have a chance to go to the site, but I was just using the Google map, and in that, it seemed like the map, the photo showed there was like graffiti on the wall, so hopefully whatever new wall that is going to be built will be maintained and will be graffiti-free.
Okay, so-
I think that should be another part of the condition.
Okay.
Item number 12, 4415 BZ 145 Central Park North, Manhattan.
Haywood Street.
Oh, Hayward.
Hayward Street first,
we
right?
had.
Oh, what did I do?
Oh, this was all, these comments were all
White
having to
Plains.
do with White Plains?
Right.
Okay, that's
Oh,
not what she
I'm
called.
sorry. That's what I called. Oh, crap.
What?
Yeah,
Ah, mother crap.
you called Hayward Street, and then you
Sorry.
gave comments on White Plains
White
Road.
Plains.
Oh,
Sorry, I thought you were on White Plains.
Yeah, so did
yeah,
I.
yeah, because that's the order of our.
Which confused me, I was like, there's no retail in here. What are you- It's very confusing.
That's on White Plains Road, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry,
That's
Jessica, did you get that?
193-13?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm sorry, that was 19313 BZ 4770 White Plains Road, Bronx.
sorry about that, I should have called that.
Okay.
Now we're on Hayward.
Now we're
Now we're
in
in Hayward.
11, 31614 BZ 115 Hayward Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry.
All right.
My fault, my fault.
Okay, so then, let me get down there, sorry, okay. Okay, we got a revised traffic study, which I'm sorry to say is really not up to the required level of a traffic study, but we sort of read between as much as we could read between to figure out that it's probably, you can say.
This was the intention of the traffic study, is to help meet the C finding. It's not a seeker requirement, as we've discussed. So it's, sort of at the discretion of the board as to what they want to see to meet the C finding here. And, there's information about the bus arrivals and how that works, and then the traffic and usage in the neighborhood, which, I think that we can all agree that there's a lot of walking and transit use that goes on in this neighborhood, and that's borne out by census information. They make the claim here, but there's actual census information that supports that. So, I think that there is some substance here that you guys can discuss
Okay.
here.
I mean, the main issue was whether the buses that they're going to be having come with the students. The main issue was whether or not the buses would add significantly to the traffic problems. We also didn't discuss about children walking, so many kids walking, and what kind of interface they have with the area. There's a school next door, I believe, so
Yeah.
there's already
There's already kids.
lots of kids walking, so maybe that's the answer. I'm sorry that the consultant isn't up to skill set on this kind of story, and I hope that we don't have to see that again. With respect to the acoustical treatment of the play area. They provided cut sheets for the acoustic fence, but we had asked them how they determined that that would be adequate to buffer the noise from the children playing, and they didn't give us any information on that. I also couldn't tell whether it's only going to be used on the second floor play area or also on the roof, the top roof. And in both cases, though, it may be visible on the second floor, but it certainly would be visible on the roof, and so LPC has to sign off on that. So I just don't know what the status of that is. Anybody else with this one?
I just had one question based on the
Can you
traffic.
speak up,
Sorry.
speak louder?
Based on the traffic study that was provided, I just wanted to know if the street along that school, does it have enough curbside capacity for the incremental buses? I believe there's going to be an increment of, right now there's 4, there'll be increment of 6. So is there adequate curbside capacity to handle all these buses to queue? Because I understand that not all the buses will be able to approach the school at the same time, so they'll be waiting, and once each bus empties out, they'll notify the other one, they'll pull up. So either they are waiting at the curbside or they're waiting on one of the moving lanes. So we just need to make sure there's enough capacity that it will not affect the traffic flow.
Right.
I just want that
There-
clarification.
There's only space for
three.
3 buses at a
There's- yeah.
time, so they're going to have to wait somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right, so I think that clarification would be helpful.
So there's space, maybe we should make sure they clarify this. There's space for 3 buses in front of the school or only on the block?
No, in front of the
Front of the
school.
In front of the school, okay.
Stand.
That's actually, I mean, if you look at their analysis, they have a shift in the morning where they have, it's 7 buses arriving, and they say that each of those buses takes approximately 3 minutes
Right.
to unload. And so, you know, that, if they have 3 buses at a time, that's 4 buses that are either arriving. They can discuss how they're staggered if
Yeah.
if they're not arriving on the block
Right.
until,
For those each time
Yeah.
slots of 8:30 to 9,
Right.
7:30 to 8,
Right.
if each slots, we're getting 3 or 4 buses,
right,
there is we just want to make sure for that slot, there's enough capacity
Right.
on that curbside.
Right.
Yeah.
I think they can break that down a little
Yeah.
more.
Okay, thank you.
Now, item number 12, 4415 BZ, 145 Central Park, Manhattan. Oy.
Oi. Okay, the applicant revised the design to reduce the height of the building to 12 stories and 125 feet by reducing the rear yard to 23 feet and eliminating all the setbacks. Well, there's no penthouse really anymore to speak of. As a reminder, 120 feet is as of right, with a setback at 85 feet. And there are now 33 units in the building. They provided perspectives, but not a streetscape. So the streetscape helps us understand the comparison among the buildings, and the perspectives help us understand what it's going to feel like in context, so we actually need the streetscape. We had also asked for aerial photos, kind of bird's eye views, so that you can understand the variety of building heights in the area, instead of just using a plan that, I find that the map that they provided where they talk about buildings that are taller than 150 feet and that kind of thing isn't really helpful, because you don't see the subtle differences. The gradations are too large for you to understand the subtle differences in heights. They still insist on parking on the first floor and not in the cellar. So the building is forced to be about 15 feet higher than it would be without it, and it has a blank facade at grade, which I have a problem with in terms of urban experience. I fail to see why an automated, unattended parking system wouldn't be the way to go for this, which would enable cellar parking and probably more parking spaces, since the unattended automated systems are much more efficient than self-park. I saw I went online actually and saw that now it's like half a dozen different kinds of companies that do these amazing automated systems, and they're like all over the country, even in student housing. So then with respect to the financials, which I'll only go into a little bit, the update to the financial contains a statement that actually makes no sense whatsoever to me, that the area takeoff by the cost estimator is different than the architect's takeoff for gross area. I'm like, how can there be less than gross or more than gross? Gross is gross. I suspect simply that the plans were not coordinated with the cost estimator's latest estimates, and that's all. Either that, or we need to know what possibly isn't costed out in the construction of a building, because that would be folly.
Well, I don't think it should ever be like that. I don't, first of all, there was no rhyme or reason to the way in which the deductions were taken. In fact, in one case, I think McQuilkin was actually, had more space than actually
Right.
was costed out. I think that the architect's plan should rule, and McQuilkin should go along with the architect's plans, the end.
Right.
That's
yeah.
it. Because we're approving the project, we're not approving McQuilkin's plans for the project.
right.
So therefore, this is just how it should be going forward.
Yes.
But, I mean, if you, just in response to that, if you look even further after they make that statement, the narrative blurb on page 4 of the revised proposal still has a different gross built area than the chart on page 1. So you still, even though they made that statement, McQuilkin's figures still are reported differently between pages 1 and pages 4 of the financial report that was revised. So I don't even understand the reasoning for that.
Right.
So.
Okay, yeah, it seemed, ridiculous to try to make an explanation for that.
I agree.
I mean, it seemed like wasting time typing. With respect to the lesser variance with parking in the cellar that's used in the financials, no plans were provided to show us on what it's based at all. It should actually be the revised proposed, but with the automated cellar parking. This would also remove the cost of the valet service, so the per space cost could then be the same in terms of sales, and then you just have the upfront construction cost of buying one of those systems, which in another project we learned eventually amortizes out and you make money.
Well, also, I mean, I think that we need to see the plans, because the whole argument for not having the parking in the cellar and putting the apartment on the first floor, they go into a whole detail about, well, we still wouldn't put an apartment on the first floor because the way in which the cellar ramp and the cellar layout and the parking and the core, there would be no space on the first floor to put an apartment because it would isolate some space in the rear that would almost be cut off from the front. That's wasted on us, because without plans to see what they're talking about,
Yeah.
who knows what they're talking about?
Right.
So, I mean, it just looked to me, when you looked at, if you look at the original scenario with the parking in the cellar, it looks like there would be space on that first floor, a nice large chunk of space. I think it's like a multi-purpose room or something that looks like it could be an apartment.
Right.
So,
Well, that's what I
yeah,
wanted
so,
to know too.
yeah, so without those plans
Yeah.
and their explanation, to me, is just
Right.
confusing.
Right, and then with respect to the revised proposed, exactly that. There's this multi-purpose room of questionable utility in these giant apartments. I understand the idea of a multi-purpose room in the buildings where they're tiny apartments and people have nowhere to be, so they hang out together. But what do you need them for here, to rent to the community board? I mean, I don't actually know what it's for. And so why wouldn't you just make that into an apartment with with a direct garden access? I mean, you could make that a maisonette with direct garden access, you could make it an apartment. That just seemed like a way to bring the cost apparent income down, which I didn't understand.
I question the need for the penthouse portion of the, the upper two duplex units. Just increases the height waiver I think since they've added a rear yard waiver, they should either comply with the building height or the setback. Reduce it by one waiver, because I think the floor plans work much better this way, but it has increased the number of waivers.
Right.
And I had previously asked, when they give us a scenario, to give a pile layout to justify their costs, and I didn't see that.
Maria?
I think that the financials actually clarified the apartment pricing regarding the outdoor space. I actually like this table better than the previous tables because it outlined exactly how much space and what the price for the space would be. It was pretty clear to follow, so I was actually happy with that. The parking, I believe they submitted more comparables of actual space sales that, even though these comparables are all located in downtown, you know, which was one of the original comments, but at least they provided that they actually are selling for that price. So, and they are putting, I think, a 15% negative adjustment on those sales price for location. So, you know, I would accept that, actually. They did give us an explanation for the construction period and the sales periods for the various scenarios, because I had questioned that before. And they had stated that it's dependent on the height of the building, the complexity of development, and the number of units. However, when you look at the typical as-of-right, which to me is probably the easiest thing to build, it takes 44 months to build and sell that, yet it's actually an easy project to build, and it's smaller than the revised proposed, but the revised proposed takes 40 months to build. So it still seems like it's somewhat arbitrary, you know, how they're coming up with these numbers. It, to me, is not clear. But I was happy to see that they did take the 20 feet off of the top. To me, it looks like it would fit in a lot nicer than the original project. And it's nice that they were able to incorporate our suggestions as to making the floor plate larger and just moving into the rear yard.
Yeah, it's significantly changed, because now it's almost a standard footprint for an apartment building. Yeah.
Makes much more sense.
Anybody else?
I felt the revised plan was significantly better in terms of the massing and the layouts. I had a couple of questions. One was, in the analysis, the financial analysis, it talked about the lesser variance development will require more construction period than an as-of-right. So again, going back to Commissioner Otley Brown's, like, why would a lesser variance would require more than the as-of-right and even what is being proposed? That clarification would be helpful. And again, the documentation, it was not clear whether the lesser variance was the same as the as-of-right with an underground parking, or was it the as-of-right itself, because the map, the drawings were saying something, and the financial statement was saying something, so I was having difficulty comparing the analysis. The other one was, I would like a clarification as to why the underground parking would require 24-hour attended parking, which was not proposed for the at-grade parking. I mean, at the end, the total number of parking spaces that would be provided on underground would be, what, 5 or 8 spaces? Why would an underground require an attended parking but not if it's at grade? And that, to me, didn't make, operationally, I just couldn't understand the argument.
They're saying, but it's not the way technology works today, that when you have to go into you drive your car into the elevator, you need to have a valet, but in fact, the technology now is rather brilliant, and you can just drive in and you leave your car alone, and you can either drive in and you can handle the elevator yourself, or you literally drive into the elevator, hit a button, and it stores your car automatically.
Right.
So, I mean, I know it's expensive, but still.
This was not, yeah.
Okay.
Item number 13, 6215BZ, 139 Bay Street, Staten Island.
Just checking. Okay, they eliminated the second parking garage elevator, and they now provide a nice kind of queuing area at the entrance so that there won't be the lineup that we were concerned about. They clarified the requested waivers, which was very helpful. They also provided a streetscape to show that the proposed building is the same height as the neighbor, except that it's on an extreme slope. The photos also show the proposed height that I think is in keeping with the neighborhood. They show it from the waterside view. What we do need is a complete set of the proposed plans submitted as a package. No, they only submitted the plans that had changed, so in order for us to keep it straight, we needed to submit it all together. Those were my only comments. Anybody else?
Yeah, we had originally addressed the issue of the lesser variance and why it wouldn't have worked. And the reason why was because the financials had an inconsistency or a part of it that I thought was incorrect, and we received a response. I had thought that the numbers didn't bear out using a 6.0 cap rate, and that if the numbers were corrected, it would show that the lesser variance would show that it had a return. It turns out that the financial analysis had left out inadvertently the fact that they were using a 7.0 cap rate for the lesser variance and a 6.0 cap rate for the proposed, which I had questioned because I had said that both scenarios seemed like they were essentially the same, except for a few square footage off of the 6th floor and one less parking level, and so therefore I didn't see why you should have different cap rates. So they did submit to us, I guess, an answer for that. It was a Cassandra Properties letter that basically stated that the lesser variance wouldn't work because this was a very car-dependent borough, and not only that, you didn't have any on-street parking availability, being that you were on that very large thoroughfare, and you had no side streets that you can use. And that because of that, not only would it not be as attractive to the apartment dwellers, but it also wouldn't be attractive retail space because you wouldn't have enough parking in the garage to satisfy your retail customers. I actually would accept that letter. However, I think it now has to tie back into the financials and at least correct what I originally thought was the financial error. So they just need to go back into the financials and state that, you know, there was supposed to be a 7.0 cap rate for the lesser variance, and the reasons why are referenced in the Cassandra Properties letter. This way, that'll actually correct the problem in the first report and then also tie this letter into the financials.
Great.
I wanted a little bit more information about the rear balconies. I guess this property has a side yard at the rear. The adjacent property has a rear yard at the rear. So it looked to me from their plan that their balconies are recessed. Their rear wall is like 30 feet back with a balcony versus this property, which is only recessed 8 feet. So, and then they seem to have a solid side wall, which I did question whether there was a need for that solid side wall because the balconies are abutting the adjacent property. If there could be, it would increase the visibility if it wasn't a solid masonry sidewall adjacent to the balcony.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And I just was wondering, I didn't really look, is there a maximum permitted number of parking spaces allowed for this residential retail development, and to make sure they're not exceeding that?
Or if they are, then they have to request a variance for that,
Right.
right? Okay.
New cases, item number 1, 5715 BC, 482 Logan Street, Queens.
Okay, this one, we're going to postpone, or because the applicant needs to go to DOB and get an interpretation on a parking question. So that we're going to postpone this for a few months because it's DOB interpretation.
Isn't it really a zoning regulation interpretation?
Yeah, it's a getting a ZRD1 about their interpretation on where the parking can be located versus what they think.
Okay, because I had thought that that was something we could interpret and not rely on the DOB, but
They have to ask for it.
No, then they'd have to ask for a waiver, and for some reason, they don't want to ask for a waiver. I don't really know why. And why? We could talk about that a little bit more, but.
Well, they'd have to get the objection from buildings
Right.
first for us to waive it.
That's true.
Yeah, and they have to go back to get it.
Yeah.
Okay. This concludes the executive session for December 7, 2015.